cost. So now if you make your dotted lines down here, right, this is a quantity, this is our socially efficient. We go back to that allocated efficiency, socially efficient, where social equals social. So marginal social benefit equals our marginal social cost, meaning we're currently producing Q3, but what's best for society is if we only produce Q1. So they ask, what is the consumer surplus right here? And it's JKP5, because this is now the price that's going to be set in the marketplace. So it'll be this triangle right up here. And then what's the deadweight loss? This, of course, is the tricky point, because kids automatically say to themselves, I remember deadweight loss. It's this. No, 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 no. If there's a negative externality and you're currently producing here, there's a deadweight loss. You'd make your dotted lines up from your equilibrium, right? And it would be right up here, be this triangle. But when you go to socially efficient, the key is right here, okay? That word right there. They corrected for the negative externality. Well, if you correct for the negative externality and you're at socially efficient, then there is no deadweight loss because you're at socially efficient. So the answer is there is no deadweight loss. And if they ask you like things like explanation points, right? Because on here it says identify the area representing each. So you say none, but if they ask, well, explain why, because you're at socially efficient and there's no deadweight loss. Get kind of some of the practice stuff that we're doing here. One of the things I'm really trying to get you guys to do is when we see these free response questions on the AP test, that your explanation points, you don't miss any of those, because those are the easy points, right, that you want. I've always thought that free response are a little easier in multiple choice, as long as you know exactly what kind of keywords they want you to use. Okay, so for today, easy stuff. There's our review from Friday. Today we get to talk about public and private goods. And if you have a notebook, we're not going to draw any graphs today. Really no graphs that are going along with this stuff. Today's much more about knowing some of the terms. And not only will this help you in an economic standpoint as we're finishing up the course. Tomorrow is the last day of Unit 6 that we're going to talk about. And then Wednesday and Thursday, we're going to talk about something that a lot of you probably were just getting to, or maybe just finished, which is labor market graphs. I know in my class, we just got done right before we were quarantined and school was canceled. So for a lot of you guys, it'll be really fresh when we go through Wednesday and Thursday. And if you missed any questions, or if you kind of question, because I know labor graphs can be a little tricky, we're going to do that Wednesday and Thursday. So today, plenty to chat about, plenty of images, good stuff to talk about. So the first term I want to talk to you guys is the difference between when a good is rival and what it is non-rival. So a good is rival simply if one person's use diminishes other people's use. So if you think about this for a minute, if I use a good or a service and I take away from someone else using that good or a service, so I have some pictures up here for a reason. I'm fly fishing in a river, and I'm out of the Roaring Fork River out there in Colorado, and I'm fly fishing, and I take a fish out of the river, that's one less fish for you. It's rival, right? You can't necessarily exclude me from using that river, but every time I take a fish out, it's rival. So the other example, I have a cup of coffee. Every time I have a sip of that coffee, that's more coffee I have, that's less coffee for you. So that's what it means if a good is rival. And the reason I'm giving you these terms today, they're important. Before we can talk about public and private goods, there's specific terms you have to know. The next is non-rival. So a good is non-rival if I consume the good and I'm not taking away from your ability to also consume the good. Now, this is a little easier to talk about when you're talking about certain services, things like that, because goods, right? If I eat a donut, you can't have the rest of the donut. And every time I eat a donut, there's one less for you. Clearly, it's rival. But something like I'm going to a college up on Lake Ontario, we'll call it SUNY Oswego, and people used to get together and clap for the sunsets. And we're talking back in the day. I'm sure people don't clap for sunsets probably too much anymore. But when the sun would set, it was always a beautiful sunset over Lake Ontario. And if I stand there and watch it, I'm not taking away from yours, right? You're watching a fireworks show somewhere and you're 20 feet away from me watching the same fireworks show. Theoretically, it's non-rival. I'm not taking away from your ability to consume the service, watch the fireworks show. Now, if you're one of those people who go to fireworks shows and every single time one explodes and you say, ooh, oh, that's my favorite, then maybe you are taking away from others, but that's a separate thing. And then tornado sirens. If you live in the Southeast and you're down in Charleston, these areas, right? Hurricane sirens to warn people. If I listen to the tornado siren, it's not like the government, if I didn't pay my taxes, it's not like they send someone around and they put their hands over my ears so I can't listen to the tornado siren. Everyone gets to hear the tornado siren. It's non-rival. When I listen to it, I'm not taking away from your ability to listen to a tornado siren. So that's what it means to be rival and non-rival. And then let's talk about public and private goods here. So a purely public good is non-rival and non-excludable. Obviously, I don't need to waste your time taking a slide to talk about what it means to be excludable and non-excludable, right? You can either exclude someone or you can't. So those are purely public goods. So let's think about this for a minute. I can't exclude people from using the good. And when people use a good, they don't take away from others using the good. So that's a pure public good. Couple examples, national defense. I'm low income, I pay no federal income tax whatsoever, and we get invaded by Canada tomorrow. Not a real threat right now. I'm not too worried. Canadians are great people. But up here in Michigan, we share a border. If Canada invaded, the government couldn't say, we're going to protect everyone who paid taxes, but Pedlo's house, allow him to destroy it because he didn't pay his tax. That's not how it works. We all get the benefit of national defense. Another example, public libraries. You can't exclude people from using public libraries, hence the term public. And they're really non-rival, right? If I'm walking through a library looking for books, I probably am not taking away from you consuming the same good. So you got a picture of a library here. This library actually won the Library of the Year one year. And beautiful, beautiful building here in Chelsea. And then how about streetlights? Another great example. So imagine if streetlights were private. You had to pay. So I'm a rational person. And I'm thinking to myself, my neighbor is not a rational person. And I know they worry about, they have two very nice cars in their driveway. And they want to make sure there's a street light so, any hoodlums and juvenile delinquents aren't going to come, vandalize their vehicles, anything like that. So they want to make sure there's a really bright LED street light out there. I don't care. I don't own nice vehicles. My yard isn't that great. So I think to myself, gosh, I would like a street light, but I don't want to pay for it. So if the private firms did it, what would happen is my neighbor would pay, but he couldn't exclude me from using the street light. The light would go in my yard too, and I'd get the benefit of that. And so that's why public goods do it. My neighbor, guess what? Wouldn't put up a street light, because why would the neighbor say, all of my neighbors are using this and I'm the only one paying for it? So they wouldn't do that. And then a private good is the opposite. If a purely private good would be both rival and excludable. So the best example, Joe's Pizza. If you're in New York, oh, are you kidding me? And you go get a huge slice of Joe's, you fold it in half, right? You're ready to eat it. The grease just pours all over you. It's the greatest thing in the world. So food is a great example. As I eat that Joe's Pizza and I'm eating more of it, I'm taking away from your enjoyment and I can exclude you. It's mine. I paid for it. You can't just have that. Clothing, right? If I buy the sweater at a thrift store and I go in and I spend $8 on this, it's mine. And every time I use it, there's less of a chance that you can use it as well. So that's what the difference. So purely public goods are non-rival, not excludable, and pure private goods are rival and excludable. Okay, so that's the difference between public and private goods. Now, we're not done there. So don't think, well, that was quick, because there's a problem. And it goes back to exactly what I was just saying with the street light. Those people, we have a problem. They're called free riders, right? So if you've never heard the term, or maybe your friends have called you a free rider, that's probably not a good thing. So I had a buddy I grew up with, and he never seemed to have his wallet every time we went everywhere. We called him a free rider for years. Econ free riders are a little bit different here. So a free rider is someone who's receiving the benefit of a good, a public good, without paying for it. So we've now given them an official name in econ. These people are called free riders. So they're benefiting from the public good without paying for the public good. So an example, and we're going to talk a lot about some examples and then solutions possibly to this, but this is what goes back to that street light. Public goods create this problem because consumers are able to use them without paying for it. So we call this now the free rider problem. If my neighbor goes and puts that street light up, I'm getting the benefit of it. So guess what? Private firms are unwilling to produce public goods. And we can go through a litany of different examples of this. And today I'm going to go through some of these. But if we use that street light for a second, right? And I know we've said this, my neighbor probably doesn't do it. So now no one on the street has street lights. So then what? higher risk of crime, property damage, things of that nature. So the government says, local government, right, your local town or city says, well, we don't want to deal with the crime. Police have enough to do. So what if we install the streetlights? Everyone has access to it. Well, what if I'm poor and I don't pay city taxes either? Do I still get used to the streetlight? Well, of course I get used to the streetlight. Hence, the government goes out and does it. The government does not walk around, knock on your door and ask how much you pay in taxes and then screw in a brighter light bulb based on your tax level, right? That'd be a very odd thing to do. So let's go through some examples of you might be a free rider. So there's Starbucks, NPR up here. Hopefully you know what NPR is. So let's say you go to an art museum without paying for it. And if that's covered up with my face up there, it says tin staffel, right? You guys all know tin staffel. There is no such thing as a free lunch. So let's say you go to the Toledo Art Museum. Beautiful, gorgeous art museum. Next to it's a glass blowing museum. You can sit down at this counter and the oven is right in front of you and they'll turn around and say, what do you want us to make? And you literally can be like, oh, hummingbird. And they'll just, I don't know how to do it. It's crazy. And they just make a hummingbird and throw it right back in the oven. Guess what? It's free to go see those things. Well, is it really free? Well, of course not. You have staff, you have rent, you have utilities to pay, you're buying art. So we know there's nothing in life that's free, but if I go there and I don't pay, but if I just told you it's free, why would I pay? When those of you who are rational and smart, you're probably saying, I've been to an art gallery before and I know exactly where this is going. They can ask me for money, right? They can ask for things like donations. And that's one way they get money. So if you go and you walk by and you don't pay, then you're free riding. How about NPR, right? You guys know as well as I do, if your parents listen to NPR in the mornings on the way to school, that 2-3 times a year, they have these pledge drives and there's some people enjoy them. Some people rather listen to the news. Usually it's two really bubbly personalities. And they're saying things like, Karen, don't you think everyone should donate to listen to NPR? Oh, Chuck, I think so. And, I value every day $1 listening to NPR, although I think it's way more. You could put $1. And so that's $365 for someone to write a check. And if you do, we can give you like a tote bag and things of that nature. And so they run through these and they usually take 3-4 days. And that's how they fund a lot of their budget. If you listen to NPR every day and every time they have those pledge drives, you don't donate, then once again, you're free riding. Or national defense, like I said earlier, if you refuse to pay taxes or you're skimming on your taxes or you don't pay taxes and we get invaded, you're still getting that benefit, but you're free riding, right? You're not paying for the national defense, you're just getting the benefit. And then let's say, not that any of you would ever do this, let's say you go to a Starbucks and social distancing applies. So you find a table, well, most of them are probably closed, but during a normal time, you sit down at a table and what do? You flip open your laptop and you put on your headphones or your AirPods and you sit and listen to your music and you kind of zone out. Do you buy a coffee? And some of you say, no, I'm not gonna, I don't drink coffee or I don't want to pay, inflated prices or whatever. Well, you're free riding. So you're getting the benefit of that public good. It's free Wi-Fi, but you're not paying for the good. So those are all examples of free riders. And there are solutions, believe it or not. And if you start thinking about, well, if this is such a problem, which it is, then how do you get away with it? So number one, we talked about this, okay? Due to free riders, private firms won't produce public goods. So, right, public libraries. We'll talk about that for a minute, okay? Before we get to the exact solutions. Let's think about why this is such a problem. Let's think about public libraries, okay? There's your bouncer for the public library. Imagine that. That guy, every day you walk into the public library, he's standing there, his arms are about the size of my waist, and you walk into the public library and it's a private, not public library anymore. So it's a private library and someone owns it. It's a profit maximizing opportunity, right? Just think about all the profit maximizing firms that are out there. This library is one of them. So first of all, you would need a library card. And what would you do? Well, you'd pay. Now, someone who reads a lot, like myself, my mom, we might pay $100 for this card. I'm still saying I'd pay a couple $100 for this. If I read a book a week, that's 50 books a year, 20 books, that's $1,000 a year. I'm not spending in books. So if I spend 100, it's still benefiting me. Some of you are saying, I don't know if I would pay $1 for that because some of you may not use libraries as much. So a private library, I'd have to pay membership. And then maybe because it's private, I'd have to show my membership card before I can even go in. They don't want people wandering around the library, or even worse, taking books off the shelves and opening it up and reading, and then tomorrow coming back and opening chapter 2. It's a private firm. They're there to make profit. They're not there to just let people use it. So when we talk about the solutions, number one, simple taxes. If you're going to supply a public good, the people who are going to get the public good are going to have to pay taxes for the public good. Now, this is difficult, right? You can't install on your radio or on your phone an NPR app that asked how much you paid in taxes and how much of those taxes went to NPR. So that's kind of tricky, right? Number two, you can make the public good, just privatize them all and then see what happens. So people want the good, they can pay for the good. So think about national defense now. Wealthy people, very wealthy people, could hire private security firms, and the rest of us couldn't. So if we got invaded, there would be no national defense. There wouldn't be helicopters and planes, things like this. It depends on how much money you had to pay to get your own private security or your own private army. And now you can start seeing, I think, the problems associated with this. Or donations. Now, donations are tough to do because a lot of people don't want to just give you money. They want something in return. So what does NPR give? Coffee mugs, tote bags. They give things that have their, right? They have the NPR logo on it so they can show other people, I listen to NPR, I'm smart, I support NPR, because you can't go and buy an NPR t-shirt in the mall, but you can if you donate. And so the message, if I have an NPR t-shirt that I'm sending out there is, not only am I smart, look how smart I am. I listen to National Public Radio instead of listening to my local rock and roll station. And not only that, but I'm a good person. I have donated, and that's why I have this t-shirt. Or some in Britain, I remember reading this a few years ago, cafes were filling up with people who weren't ordering products. They just wanted free Wi-Fi. And so the firms, they want to offer free Wi-Fi to people. It gets people in the door. They don't want people sitting there. So what they do is they put time limits. They put a 2-hour time limit on it. After that, you could not log back on. So if you want to stay, start ordering stuff. Then they will let you stay. And so when we talked about those donation boxes, some of you may have seen this before, right? Go to a national park. So let's talk about this for a minute and talk about why, because all this is important. You can't just look at this and say, oh, it's a wooden thing with a glass box on it. Well, why is it glass? So those of you thinking, because they want you, when you walk in to that art gallery, that national park, they want you to see how many other people have put money in there. It can't be full. That'll slow down donations. So those of you who have a job and you accept tips for things like pouring coffee or serving an ice cream cone, which aren't necessarily normal tip jobs back when I grew up. But if you're getting $10 an hour and then you serve me an ice cream and you have a tip cup, right? What do? You put $1 in there to start the day off. You want people to visually see, oh, other people are tipping. I might as well give that person $1. But you don't start with a 50. You don't want people to be like, well, that kid made $50. I don't need to tip him. So they have glass boxes like this, and they make sure, and by the way, coins, no, they want paper money, right? They want our currency in there. Yes, I'm well aware it's not paper, but they want the green. Or today they're upgrading. And this comes from over in Europe. They're actually letting you on the way out, take your phone out and Apple Pay and money, which is awesome because the further removed you are from spending, the easier it is to spend. So if I have cash in my hand, it's hard, but if I take my phone and just touch something, it's not even real at that point, right? So that's one way they're getting away with the free rider problem. Kind of interesting when you talk about this. And then the last thing for today, the tragedy of the commons. And this also deals with public goods because the tragedy of the commons. So write this down. You guys can take a couple notes here. I know some of this stuff, right, kind of quite quick. Hopefully we went through this stuff. So, quite easy. So the tragedy of the commons are simply when some of these public goods, like common goods, they get used more than is desirable from the standpoint of society. So what would an example be of the tragedy of the commons? Okay, we're going to talk about a couple of these. So overfishing out in our oceans or litter, right? And it occurs because some natural resources are non-excludable, but rival. So if you go back to those terms we started with today, some natural resources are, you can't exclude people from being there, but they're rival. So think about your high school parking lot. Let's say we all go back to school May 1st, and we're just thrilled to death to be back amongst our teachers and our peers. And you guys are just so excited to be back in school. And you pull into your parking lot, right? Most of you are juniors and seniors probably, and a lot of you probably drive to school every day. So you pull into your parking lot, and can we exclude you? No, it's public property. It's a parking lot. You can drive through it, right? Especially if you go to that school. How is it rival? Because if you pull into your parking spot and someone else took it, well, it's not really yours. It's a public lot. So we're going to talk about this tragedy of the commons, a couple examples, but think about this parking lot. Let's say that at the end of the day, you walk through that parking lot, you're parked in the very back. It's a bad day, you hit snooze a bunch, and you're all the way at the back of the parking lot, and you come out of school and it's 3 o'clock and there's some fast food trash sitting in the parking lot. Do you clean it up? And I know what you're all sitting, no matter what state you live in right now, and you're going, probably not. But why not? So if that was private, so let's say you get home, so you drive home and you pull into your driveway and there's a McDonald's cup or a McDonald's cheeseburger wrapper sitting there. Do you pick it up? I would hope you'd say yes. I hope you wouldn't be like, man, probably not. Yes, of course you pick it up. It's on your lawn. Well, what's the difference? It's trash either way. And if you say it's not my trash, it wasn't your trash in the lawn either. The tragedy of the commons is we're going to overuse public resources. So why don't we clean up litter? Because it's not ours. It's not our parking lot. It's a public good. And if I don't pick it up, maybe someone else will. And if I do pick it up, well, other people wouldn't. So we'll just leave it. So how can we get away with that? Let's go back to our free rider problem. One of them I said was privatize it. Some schools around the country, and maybe your school, they sell off parking spots to kids and seniors. I like this, right? You should, if you're a senior, you get first pick, right? Kings of the castle. And then you could take paint, and it goes away at the end of the year. They come out and power wash it, and kids get to paint, school appropriate, of course, and they get to paint each parking spot. So you hit snooze, and you show up late, and guess what's waiting for you? You're a parking spot at the very front of the parking lot. And now, here's where we're going to take this one step further. So now, public and private good, right? We've solved the free rider problem, but I got even better. We can solve tragedy of the commons. Every time there's trash in your parking spot, you get fined. And that's a way to deal with tragedy of the commons. But you can say, well, what if it's not my trash? I don't care. It's your private parking spot. So if someone was dumping trash, you'd probably pretty quick find out who it was. So if you think about like public bathrooms, maybe they're a little dirtier than your bathroom at home, possibly. Cafeteria at school, your commons areas. If you eat lunch and some of you spill milk, some of you might be like, whatever, and you go to class. I'm assuming at your dinner table tonight, if you spilled a glass of milk, you wouldn't just, there you go, mom, and get up and leave. I would hope that you would clean it up. So when we talk about these public and private, that's one of the problems. In the fish you see down here, this is kind of a fascinating. I wanted to end today's discussion before we get into a couple multiple choice questions with the discussion of this fish. Not sure if you're familiar with this. This is, in fact, the Patagonian toothfish. And if you're saying to yourself, I've never heard of that, nor had it, you probably have had it if you eat fish. It was kind of a trash fish. It would get caught on lines. They didn't know what to do with it. They'd throw it back in the ocean. And in 1970, I think it was 1977, there was an American he saw from California. He was down in Chile, and he was looking for fish to bring up to restaurants, like a wholesale thing. And he found this Patagonian toothfish down there, and it's a hideous fish. But he had a friend of his who was a chef cook it up. And so he cooked it up. He said, it's quite bland. There's not a huge fish taste to it. But what he noticed was it absorbed the taste of whatever you're cooking with. So he cooked it with some like soy sauce or something. He cooked it with some butter. I don't know, my wife's a chef, not me. So he cooked these different styles. And what they found out was the fish would absorb the taste. Bingo, he's onto something. So by the early 1980s, he's pumping this out to restaurants. Well, look at that thing. If you went to a restaurant today and you looked at the menu and you said, ooh, wow, we have snapper, we have salmon, and we have Patagonian toothfish, most of you probably wouldn't order it. So he realized a name change. So he said, they are familiar with bass. It's not a bass, by the way. But so he said, we're going to call it a bass. And because he was in Chile, when he found it, he called it Chilean sea bass. So why do I bring this up? Because people went nuts in the 90s for this thing. Lost their minds. Restaurants, higher end restaurants could not keep this in. So what happened? People started overfishing it in the oceans around the world, typically around the poles. And people went out and would overfish this to a point of almost extinction. And that's tragedy of the commons. If I'm in a boat and I reel in that fish and I say to myself, it's still alive, I can throw it back in. I'm not supposed to have this fish. The quotas in these were unbelievable. There are a lot of limits on these. So people would break the rules. So what I would say is, if I take this fish and it's worth a few $100s, but I'm not supposed to take it, but if I put it back in, the guy over there fishing, he's probably going to catch it. and that's tragedy of the commons. We're overusing public resources. Okay, so public and private goods, to wrap up a little bit, right? The difference, rival and non-rival, excludable and non-excludable, and tragedy of the commons. And today you learned how to fix the idea of private and public goods. So hopefully you can have some conversation with your folks about the difference between public and private. And next time they're listening to NPR, ask them, do you donate or are you a free rider to National Public Radio? So let's look at what a typical intro level college class would want you to see. So assuming all the residents of the city of Smallville prefer to have streetlights installed citywide, which I find best explains why individual residents do not install the optimal number. Goes right back to that example that we used in the beginning with my neighbor in the streetlights, right? So A, streetlights generate negative externalities. Well, no, there's a positive externality, right? More people are benefiting it from that. B, streetlights are not excludable. Well, you do know that's true. We just talked about that. And then C, D, and E all have to do with marginal cost, marginal benefit stuff. And we really didn't get into that much. And there's not a diseconomies of scale. As a matter of fact, the more you put in, you have an economies of scale, it's getting cheaper and cheaper. We're going to talk about that in a couple of weeks. And then the marginal cost is zero. Well, that's not true. Each additional one's going to cost you more. And then the marginal benefit is not zero. No, you're getting additional benefit every time you pull one up. So we go back to B. Number 2, characteristics of a purely public good. So let's go through each one of these. Number 1, non-paying consumers cannot be excluded from consuming the good. All right, so that's called non-excludable. Just talked about that. Number 2, consumption by any one person does not reduce the availability of the good to others. So once again, what are they defining? Rivalry. So if I consume the good, I'm not taking away from the availability. So we know 2 is correct as well. 3, the amount consumed depends on the price paid. We have not talked at all about price. There is no price to pay for the public library. Cards are free. Okay. And then how do they, by the way, this is another good thing. How do public libraries sometimes deal with this problem? Well, there's an easy way to raise money, right? Books are free, the card's free, but we're giving you 2 to 3 weeks. And if you can't bring it back, now we're going to tax you, in essence, penalize you, maybe 10 cents a day, 20 cents a day, something like that. So we know 1 and 2 are correct, 3, not so much. So the answer would be, looks like D right there. 2 more. Number 3, assume many boats have free and open access to fishing. You kidding me? Classic example. We just got done talking about this. So A, with the availability of fish for all consumers, is a positive externality. Governments need to encourage greater use of common areas. I would say not. We don't want to kill every species around the world of every fish by encouraging everyone to go take as much as they want. B, over time, fishing operations will voluntarily leave the market in increased competition. Probably not. That could potentially be true, that maybe there's so much competition, there's no money anymore. But that's not definitely true, and we certainly don't know. C, there'll be a tendency for fishing operations to overfish, reducing the stock of fish and therefore limiting availability for future generations. We certainly know that to be true. D, waters are a rare example of a resource that is not scarce. Therefore, standard economic analysis does not apply. When we get to scarcity on Friday, we're going to talk about why this is not true. And then E, because obviously, right, the United States doesn't just control the oceans. That's not all of ours. They've divvied it up, so it is a scarce resource. And then E, the advantage of allowing free and open access to fishing to limit the harm from a negative externality where 2 fish are currently being caught, and that is, of course, not true. So you go back to C, reduce the stock of fish. And the last one, public goods are typically provided by the government because private markets, so take 30 seconds or take 20 seconds, go through and figure this one out. And where are we back to? For those of you who've tuned in every day, thank you. Well done. Way to expand your economic knowledge and get through the entire course, which we're almost done with tomorrow. If you think back to what we're talking about, right? Socially optimal quantity. We keep going back to this idea. So private markets tend to produce less than is socially optimal. There would be less streetlights, private defense, things of that nature. Imagine, by the way, private fire stations, which were a thing back in Charleston, back in Philadelphia, probably Boston as well. And the idea that when they would send representatives when there were fires and you had to pay, and if you walk around downtown Charleston, South Carolina today, some of the homes still have they're obviously not original, but they're exactly what they look like. And there was this little cast iron thing you'd stick to your home, and it was a symbol for which private fire insurance company you had paid for. The other companies didn't want to fight the blaze. You hadn't paid them. Imagine this today. If your house caught on fire, and this actually happened years ago, I remember seeing this in the news, house caught on fire, the people hadn't paid their private fire insurance. And the insurance company, the fire company, some of the guys sat on their fire truck and wouldn't fight it. And so the person came out with the money in their hand saying, they said, well, no, if we allowed you to do this, then no one would pay. Everyone would just free ride until their house caught on fire. So they actually were sued, and the fire department lost. They had to pay the people back. So today, what do? We typically have public fire stations, right? And it's not a private firm trying to profit maximize. The government pays for these. And why? Because it's better off for socially optimal to produce more, to have more fire trucks, things like that. So if my house burns down, they just come fight the blaze. They don't say, have you paid? Did you pay taxes? Things like that. We're all in that pretty much together. So they pay for the fire trucks. So once again, private firms don't produce enough, so be less than socially optimal. Amazing how all of this is combining and wrapping together. So once again, if you're having any issues or know of any issues, please, please, please reach out to the College Board. They want to make this as seamless as possible when you guys take these AP tests. I think it's on Friday. Some more info is coming your way about exactly what the AP test is going to look like. I think it's this week, most likely end of the week. But it's important you guys let them know that if you're having issues, and I know Wi-Fi has been an issue because obviously so many people are on YouTube and Netflix and everything else. Hopefully by May-ish, that might not be as much of a concern. But there it is, cb.org/tech. And tomorrow, thanks for watching. And then tomorrow, last kind of unit last part of unit 6. And then Wednesday, Thursday, some labor market graphs. So I certainly hope you guys will join again tomorrow at 3 o'clock for some micro. And all of you have a good day. Take care of yourselves.